All right, guys, we've now got a 2-to-1 SPR with the exact same condensed range for the in-position player, queens through sixes, and linear range for the out-of-position player, aces through fours. Okay, still got all bet sizes available, nothing to think about there. So the difference, again, is the 2-to-1 SPR. So again, pause the video. What do you think the strategy looks like? You could think about both strategies. But, first of all, what does the out-of-position player's strategy look like? Does it still involve jamming? Does out of position continue to jam? Does a shoving range exist? Does the block come in? How should this behave differently than a 1-to-1 SPR? Et cetera, really. So go ahead, give it a pause, think about it. What bet sizes get chosen the most often? What do we know about this and how this should behave? And then, yeah, think about it for a bit and pause it and come back. Cool. Okay, I haven't looked at it yet. So what do I think is going to happen? There's definitely going to be shoving, guys. There's definitely going to be shoving. I haven't looked at this. I've looked at this, long time ago, but I haven't looked at it today or anything. Definitely going to be shoving. How do we know there's going to be shoving? Because you still have the nuts. You still have aces and kings, and your opponent still doesn't. And aces and kings are still going to jam a lot, and it doesn't matter that it's 2x pot. So we're going to see shoving. We're probably going to see pot and half pot as well, because once we get down to the symmetric range component, which would be queens through sixes, there's going to be betting, and those hands, like that symmetric setup, is probably going to favor like pot and half pot to some extent. There's also going to be blocking and things, so we're going to see a lot of bet sizes deployed, I would assume. But I would also assume for sure jamming from aces and kings, and then I would also assume, before we take a look at it, that what hands are going to bluff with. Still going to be doing the same kind of thing with fours, fives, and sixes, guys. Still going to be doing the same thing. We should see more bluffs getting utilized though now. So the bluffing frequency, as you compare the two videos, the bluffing frequency is going to be higher now. That might be something that's not obvious to people, right? Because I'm trying to get you to think, what's going to happen? How should my behavior change? You get to bluff more. You get to use more bluffs. What? Why do we get to use more bluffs? Because we're jamming. That's bigger. 2x pot. The bigger your bet is, the more bluffs per value bet. We've talked about that. We explained that. I've shown you with math. The smaller the bet size, the fewer bluffs per value bet. The bigger the bet size, the more bluffs per value bet. So that means we're going to bluff more. Okay. Where are the bluffs going to come from? Fours, fives, and sixes. We already know that. Okay. Let's go ahead and take a look. Okay, look, we've got a bunch of bet sizes here. Blocking, 30%, 50%. Pot. I told you this was going to happen. 2x pot, most heavily used bet size. Also very predictable. We've got, trust me, these are more combos. I mean, you can go back and look at the check percentage if you want to get specific and technical, but I believe these were at like 46% or so before. I'm guessing, but I think that's right. So we see 4, 5, and 6s all bluffing still. We see more bluffing from 4s and 5s. I think that's, the 4s and 5s are actually behaving more, there's a sharper difference between 4s and 5s now than 6s, which is interesting. It might have to do with the fact that 6s has more EV in the check option now. That's also not an obvious insight. Why would 6s have more EV in the check option now? Well, maybe, and I'm not saying for sure, but maybe the in-position player is value betting a little bit less often, and in terms of frequency, because the risk of being check raised is higher, because you can lose more. So maybe there's a slightly less value betting going on by in-position, certainly less jamming, potentially. Jamming is now 2x pot, so the risk of being check raised if the in-position strategy is using pot instead of 2x pot, and then not value betting as far down because of the risk of being check raised, which again didn't exist before, then maybe the in-position strategy is bluffing with 6s less often. And if the in-position strategy is bluffing with 6s less often, maybe the EV of 6s is going up. And if the EV of 6s is going up, maybe it's going to behave differently than 5s and 4s. Now, it's still worth 0. So I mean, like, it's good, but it's closer to like a knife's edge kind of thing. And how do we know the EV is still 0? Well, because it's still bluffing. So the EV can't be very high, and we would assume it's 0. We can go ahead and take a look at the EV here, and the EV of checking is still 0. Okay, EV of checking still 0, and the EV of the alternatives is also still 0. And that's because it has to be, because it's indifferent. It's doing all of the action, so it has to be worth 0. So that was predictable, but yeah, I mean, I'm just curious, like, what the in-position strategy looks like in the regards that I kind of was narrating. Okay, when we evaluate aces, kings, and queens, we have those hands. Aces and kings are jamming. Queens is not jamming. Oh, queens is jamming. Sorry, queens is jamming 27.5%. That's pretty notable. So we've got aces, kings, and queens. Queens jamming a little bit. Obviously, aces and kings jamming a lot. We are seeing aces and kings being allocated to alternative sizing choices now. Also interesting. I think it makes sense because you can bet. You can see that queens is not. I think that like the bet shove option is just quite valuable. Like blocking and then getting raised a lot and then jamming is pretty attractive for aces. So it's a viable way to get the stack in, which is a part of the allocation for aces to these other bet sizes. We see tens pure betting again, both to 10 and 30%. So that's behavior that's kind of more in line with what I would normally expect. We see a check now on jacks, which is not predictable for me. I would have messed this up. But again, you see these two hands that get a lot of value if they bet and don't want to check raise really at all. These hands are very high frequency bets, not pure bets, granted, but high frequency bets, which is I would have basically pure bet both of these. I would have had low frequency checks here. So I think this is very a lot of this is predictable and explainable. Okay, so with that, we can go ahead and take a look at the in position strategy. All right, guys, we've now got the in position strategy, and we can just take a quick look. So very easy to understand, very elegant in terms of its execution. Bluff at the bottom, sixes, you get to use all of it. Value bet at the top, queens and jacks. Bet sizing choice is there's some 2x pot with queens, but not much. And jacks and queens both have a preference for pot. Tens is betting half pot. Okay, so not too much going on here. Like I said, bluff from the bottom, value bet from the top. Don't jam. Those are things that kind of stand out. Don't jam a lot anyway. Okay, cool. So then we'll go ahead and look at the versus bet strategies now. All right, guys, we're going to take a quick look at the versus bet strategies here. So let's start with the jam, 2x pot. So we jam for 2x pot, and we would expect a 67% fold. Why would we expect a 67% fold? Simple. The risk reward for the better, right? Betting 200, total pot after the bet 300. What do we get? 67% fold. Looks just like this, right? So that's good. We're right in the realm of the world that we understand. So that's awesome. What's the value betting range? Value betting range for 2x pot is aces, kings, and queens, right? Aces, kings, and to a lesser extent queens, no jacks. We can just click on this and you can see visually. Aces, kings, and queens, no jacks, then bluffs. Okay. So when we jam, that means that we would expect queens to pure call because we're not going to fold hands that beat or split with our opponent's value bets. We're not going to fold the same hands he's value betting with when he jams into us. So we call with queens, and then we mix the rest of the range that beats his bluffs. The bluffs come from sixes and below, sixes, fives, and fours. So we start mixing with sevens. Okay. I don't think that there's too much more to be explained in terms of how this works. So we can go ahead and take a look at another bet size. Actually, we can take a look at the next most common bet size, which is well, actually, we'll take a look at pot, even though it's not the next most common bet size. We'll just take a look at the next biggest bet size. So queens mixes between jam and call. You should know at this point why is it mixing between jam and call? Well, because queens is the top of the range and jacks never calls when you jam. So queens is the top of the range. So queens there is no aces and kings allocation to this pot size bet. And jacks is the thinner value bet. And the reason that this range is now indifferent, which means it could call or jam, it doesn't matter what it does with pocket queens, is because when it jams, it gets called by queens, and it doesn't make any money, but doesn't lose any money. So it doesn't matter if you call, it doesn't matter if you raise. So when you jam, you get called by queens, and you don't get called by jacks, and you don't make any money, you don't lose any money. So that's why it does both. Some people might look at this like, well, why isn't it 50-50? And it's like, I don't know. I mean, maybe to constrain more pocket jacks combos from being added, but not completely strip them out. I mean, interesting question. I don't know. But that's fine. Like I said, this is PO solver. I don't have to predict. I don't have to know I don't have an insight into every frequency component of the strategy to play well. Okay, and again, when our opponent bets half pot, bottom of the value betting range is jacks. So if the bottom of the value betting range is jacks, we don't fold jacks. We don't mix jacks. And then we start mixing the hands below jacks above sixes. So we mix these ones. Makes sense. And then full percentage is 50%. Again, it's not exactly 50, but it's 50%, right? So that's what we would predict. 100 divided by 200, 50%. That's what we're getting. So I think very clean. Don't think that this one needs too much more. And we can go ahead and take a look at versus bet strategy now for the out of position player. All right, guys, we're now going to take a quick look at the versus bet strategy for out of position. So when the in position player, we'll skip the jam. I guess we could take a quick look at the jam. We are expecting an elevated fold percentage. Let's keep that in mind. So if we jammed, we are expecting normally our calculation would say 67% fold, 33% call. We're expecting more than that. Why are we expecting more than that? Because 4s and 5s don't count, right? So there's a component of the defending, 4s, 5s, and 6s don't really count. So there's a component of the range for out of position that doesn't beat the bluffs the in position player is using. So we are expecting and predicting a fold percentage that is higher than the 67%. Okay. So again, I haven't seen this, so I could be wrong, but I doubt it. We get a 75% fold, very predictable. 4s and 5s don't count. Yeah, so I mean, like, I don't think this really needs too much explaining. When our opponent jams, it's just queens that jams. We can isolate this. It's just queens that jams. It's just 6s that bluffs. So queens on the value side, 6s on the bluffing side. With respect to queens on the value side and 6s on the bluffing side, we call with queens the hands that our opponent's value betting, and then the hands above that at pure weights. And then we start mixing hands that beat bluffs and lose to the value bets. So that would be jacks through 7s, and we mix these hands. Okay. Again, I don't think that there's too much explaining that needs to go on there. You can go ahead and take a look at the versus bet strategy when the bet is to pot. So when the bet is to pot, we can take a look at the subset of hands that are in the pot size. So we have queens, we have jacks, comparable weights, and then we have 6s as the bluff. And now we can go ahead and take a look at the strategy that's deployed here. So against pot, jacks is the value bet that's at the bottom. So jacks calls. Doesn't make sense to raise the value bet at the bottom and then cut yourself into queens. So you call with jacks. Obviously, the hands 9s through 7s beat bluffs, lose to value bets. 10s is just missing because of pure bets. 9s through 7s beat bluffs, lose to value bets. Those are hands that are where the mixing takes place. And then aces, kings, and queens. Queens can't lose, right? So queens is the top of the opponent's range. So we jam aces through queens. If we do jam, jacks has to call. So there's some EV that's being generated by pocket queens when it does jam. The defending strategy is not just pocket queens, and that's important. An important thing to understand, and that's why queens is not mixing. So queens isn't mixing here because queens gets called by jacks. So it's not indifferent between shoving and calling. You have to shove. I guess the last thing I would touch on is when we jam, a lot of people get really confused because they're like, they bet 100. Okay, they bet 100 as the in position player. So we're going to flip around a little bit here, and this might be a little bit confusing. I apologize if that's the case, but hopefully this helps. Some of you might be confused, and some of you you'll just understand what I'm talking about. So out of position checks, in position bets pot, out of position jams, and what should the fold percentage for in position now be? It should be 50%. How do we know it's 50%? Because the out of position player is still just making a bet. A lot of people get confused because it's so cheap. Like there's, it costs them 100 to call. There's 400 in the middle. They're like, oh, I don't know if what should I do? Like, how do I play? Like, it's still just betting. It's still just about the other guy's risk reward. The other guy is risking 200 to win a total of 400. So the fold percentage should be 50%. He's betting 200. That's his risk if he jams. The total pot after his jam is really easy here. 200 plus 200. I'm not a rocket science, but I can do that. So 200 divided by 400 equals 50%. That should be the fold percentage you should expect when you jam. And if you are the player facing the jam, that's the fold percentage you should try to target. So 50% fold. Oh, look at this. We get roughly speaking 50% fold. And that means defending queens pure, calling with some jacks, folding 6s. Okay. So which was our bluff. Okay, cool. So with that, we can go ahead and take a look at something really quickly. Check bet 100. It's just interesting when we allocate 6s here the same weight as 5s and 4s. I was just interested in that a little bit. I'm also interested in why we would jam it like 7s at any weight at all. But But far be it from me to criticize peel solver. I would have just bluffed at the bottom of the range personally. I would just bluff at this. It's easier. That's the only reason. It's just a personal observation. I was just curious. Like I said, I'm looking at this with you guys for the first time, so in a while. And like I said, fairly predictable. 50% fold. And that means defending some jacks. So thanks, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.